Okay, the meeting that is now being recorded, we're going to post it on our YouTube channel at Dr. Patterson's request. So anyone who's not here today, or if you have friends that you think would benefit from this information, then you can send them to that link and they can see what we discussed today. To see you guys the slides, because we do have a lot of supplementary slides about like grants and funding that you can receive. And then also there should be a link to our Discord server, which we use to communicate in the Corona times. And we also share like professional development opportunities, research opportunities, and we like usually game about once a week with each other. We play Among Us a lot. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started because it's 5. The officers here will introduce themselves. So I'm Larissa. I'm like the student representative of our UH SACNAS chapter, and we have a bunch of officers here. I'm one of the founding members of this chapter. I'm a biology graduate student, and I'm in my first year in the CMB program. Someone want to go next?
Okay, I can go. So my name is Alejandro Ramirez. I'm a second-year PhD physics student at the University of Houston. And so I'm here to talk to you about grad school and stuff.
I'm going to go. So my name is Jake. I just joined SACNAS this semester, and I'm a first-year biochemistry graduate student at UH. And I'm here to make sure everything runs smoothly by making sure the chat runs smoothly here.
Hi, I'm Roshni. I'm a first-year graduate student in biology. So I'm also monitoring the chat. So if y'all have any questions during the presentation today, me and Jake are going to keep track of your questions, and then we'll get to answering them at the end.
Hi, I'm Stephanie. I'm a second-year Earth and Atmospheric Science. I study geology, and I've also got my master's here at the University of Houston.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jose Daniel Velasco. I go by Daniel. I'm a fourth-year PhD computer science student. I don't have a master's. I went straight from bachelor's to PhD. So yeah, I'm a computer science, and I'm just here volunteering, talking about grad school and all that fun stuff.
Also have our faculty advisor here, Dr. Acevedo.
Hello, I'm Ricardo Azevedo. I'm a faculty member in biology and biochemistry. I'm also associate chair for graduate affairs in biology and biochemistry. So I have some insight on what happens to applications once you press submit. So.
All right, so that's good. Everyone's here. All right, so basically what we're going to be covering today is what is SACNAS, what is our organization, what do we do, why are we here, the application process for graduate school, the transition into graduate school, nearing the end of your PhD and what you need to know for that, and discussing any questions that you guys might have. We're also going to discuss our personal experiences at each step. And we would like to note that graduate experience does vary a lot, even within the same institution. So who are we? We are the SACNAS chapter at UH. SACNAS stands for the Society for the Advancement of Chicanos and Native Americans in Science. We're a chapter that's basically geared toward promoting diversity in STEM and making sure that, we're in Houston, we're one of the most diverse campuses in the nation, and we want our STEM programs to reflect that. We were established in spring of 2019. We're an interdisciplinary chapter, so we have students from biology, physics, earth and atmospheric sciences, engineering, computer science, and biochemistry. And our chapter also has graduates, undergraduates, and faculty members, so we're a very diverse chapter. And we're also really focused on building a sense of community at home, especially during this time where we can't go to campus, we can't really hang out with each other in person. We still want to be able to interact with you guys and interact with each other on a meaningful level and have like a community you guys can go to if you need help or support. We've also been connecting students with research faculty since we started our chapters. So if you're interested in research, that's definitely something that we can help you with, along with professional development and stuff like that. So you can follow us on any of our social media pages and join the Discord. This link is in the chat if you want to join. Like I said, we use Discord to communicate very frequently. So all of our opportunities are posted there. So the first question we want to ask you is graduate school right for you? This is a big commitment. You know, you're taking 5-6 years of your life to go do this PhD or 2 years to do this master's. So what are some pros and cons of going to grad school? Some reasons to go would be you're very passionate about your field of interest. You want to know more. You want to conduct research in a lab. You want to pursue a career that requires a master's or a PhD. You want to advance the field of science. You want something that's intellectually challenging. This last one, I don't think should be there, increasing your financial prospects. I left it there because we were discussing it. Like, yes, you do get paid to go to grad school. Most PhD programs and some master's programs do pay you to be a graduate student, but that definitely shouldn't be like the main reason that you pick up graduate school. So reasons to not, money is an issue. It's a really long-term commitment. So like I said, you're dedicating 2 years of your life to like masters and up to 6, maybe even 7 for a PhD. It can be very difficult and stressful at times, and you need to be a really self-motivated person. It can interfere with your personal life, and it's difficult to find a tenure track faculty position in academia. In industry, maybe there's a different story there. So first, we're going to talk about the graduate school application process. So I think for this cycle, applications are usually due around December 1st. So if you're a senior this year, or if you haven't started your application, you might be a little late on the draw this time around, but you can definitely apply next year. So what do we want to consider when choosing a graduate program? So there's a balance that you have to strike between your topic and your field of interest and programs and openings that are available. So some questions that you want to ask yourself is, does the program you're looking at include your field? Is there an advisor that you want to work with at this institution? Is the institution equipped to train you? How does their stipend look like? Do they cover your tuition, or do you have to cover your tuition? And then on the other side, what is the completion rate, the PhD completion rate of institutions? How do you fit within the program? What's their coursework like? What's the cost of living in the area where that institution is located? And what's the climate in that institution? Like, for example, Jake is from Florida, so he moved here. The climate's pretty much the same, but if he had moved up to the northeast, then that would have been really tough because it's constantly freezing cold up there. So those are all things that you have to take into consideration when you choose a graduate program. What are some common application components? So usually when you're applying to a graduate program, they're going to ask you for a CV. A CV is basically a synopsis of your scientific contributions thus far. So any research presentations that you've done, labs that you've worked in, any publications that you have, any teaching experience that you have, accomplishments like any awards that you've gotten, activities that you've participated in, like if you participated in SACNAS. SACNAS is a huge part of my CV because I've been doing this for several years now. And professional qualifications, what degrees do you have? What was your GPA, etc. So if you are in a lab already, you should consult with your PI to figure out if there is a CV format within your field that you need to stick to. Common application components also include statements of purpose or research and personal statements. So sometimes they'll ask you for like a statement of purpose, which basically includes your research and personal statement, like a 2-in-1, or they'll ask you for your research and personal statement separate. So you have to tailor each statement of purpose for each application. Like you can't just well, I guess you can copy and paste the majority of it, but you definitely have to make sure like, oh, I'm saying like the right university, like I'm a good fit for University of Houston. You can't send that letter to like Cornell or whatever. Like that would be very embarrassing. So for your statement of purpose, there's a few nails you kind of want to hit on the head when you are writing this. So for your introduction, one common mistake that people usually make is they'll be all like, oh, when I was a kid, I was like so interested in like bugs, so I really want to study entomology. Like you can't bring your early childhood into it. No one cares about your early childhood. Usually when you're writing these statements, you kind of want to start like when you got into research. That's usually when I start my personal statements or statement of purpose. You want to cover your research and skills that you have attained while you're doing your research. So what was your role in research group? What's your science communication like? What are some data that you've collected during your research? What skills did you gain during your research? Have you done any research presentations at like regional conferences, national conferences, international conferences? That stuff is super important. You're going to want to highlight your achievements. So like what awards have you won? Any scholarships? Are you involved in any extracurricular activities? Have you had any leadership positions? You want to discuss why you're interested in their program in particular. Is there a lab that you want to go to? Do the long-term goals of that institution align with your long-term goals? Do you have any program-specific interests? And you also want to cover your future goals after your PhD. So what are you getting this PhD for? Why do you want it? You have to be direct, and you have to kind of know if you want to go into academia or industry. You don't really have to know, but you kind of have to have an idea. So that's going to be a big part of like your future goals. You're also going to need letters of recommendation. You're going to need your transcript. A lot of programs do have GPA requirements. The GRE, that really depends on the program, because a lot of programs are dropping their GRE requirements, especially for this year because of COVID. And you also are going to have to pay an application fee in most cases. I've noticed a lot of institutions are also dropping this application fee requirement. So for your letters of recommendation, you want a strong letter of recommendation. You want someone who knows you, your work ethic, and your research experience. Typically you need like 3. Definitely get a 4th like backup letter just in case. And give ample time to your letter writers. Like you cannot ask your letter writers to give you a letter of recommendation like a week before it's due. Like you need to give them like at least a month and a half in advance, because they will get really upset if you ask them. And they won't be able to give you a good one if you don't give them enough time, because you want a really strong one, because letters of recommendation can really make or break your application. So it's better to give ample time to your letter writers. To make it easier for them, you can create like a Dropbox or a Google folder with your CV, programs you're applying to, and their deadlines, all of your application materials and your interests. That can definitely help them write a letter of recommendation for you. So for the GRE has 3 components: analytical writing, verbal reasoning, and quantitative reasoning. For non-English speaking, or like English is not your first language, I've heard that the verbal reasoning portion of the exam is the hardest. Quantitative reasoning has a lot of math, so I actually found that to be the hardest for me. That's actually my score right there that I got on the GRE. So I didn't do very well, but luckily most of the programs I was applying to didn't require GRE scores. But definitely don't do what I did. Definitely study ahead of time, because I thought I was just going to be able to go in and like take it and everything would be fine, but it wasn't. And make sure that you take it early. So I took mine in August, I think, and applications are usually due on December 1st. So make sure you take them like during the summer, because like you're not doing anything, you're not in class, maybe you're working, but you definitely have more time during the summer. So I highly recommend taking it in the summer if you need to. Campus visitations. So if we are free from coronavirus next year, which is unlikely, but we'll talk about it anyway. When you apply, some programs will invite you to visit, to do an interview. So that's a great opportunity for you to go to the institution and experience the climate, the life in that city or town, and the people who live there. It's really a great opportunity to make face-to-face connections with other students and faculty at that institution, and time to check out apartments and living situations in that town as well. So there's our beautiful campus. I mean, a lot of us did our undergraduates at UH and then back for our grad degree at UH as well. So there must be something going right here. These interviews are so the admissions committee can get more information about you. Since we are in this COVID climate now, it's more likely that you will have to be doing a Zoom interview or something like that. So our best advice is for you to review your application material prior to having your interview. So make sure that you know what you wrote in your statement of purpose or your research statement, all of that stuff. Make sure you know what you wrote. Make sure you know what you put in your application so that when they ask you specific questions, you're prepared to answer them. Because I think for me, I wrote all of my stuff in October, November. I submitted in November and I didn't have interviews until January. So you really do, like, there's a couple of months gap in between when you actually like write and submit the stuff and when you actually go in for the interview. So definitely take a look at your application materials again before you go into the interview. Treat it like a job interview. Be sure to ask your interviewer questions, whether that be about their work or about the program. And USA Today has a really good article about interviews, how to ace your grad school interview. So I think I'm actually going to give this one to Alejandro because that's his letter.
Okay, so one thing to help you apply to grad school is and sort of gauge whether the program is the right fit for you
Just type
is
score.
to what?
Oh, sorry.
So as I was saying, you want to reach out to professors. So this is completely fine. Essentially what you do is you do some research first. You go through, like, say you choose a program and you go through like the professors, what they have, and you see what research they're doing. And if something strikes your eye, you're like, oh, I find that interesting. I'm going to send this professor an email. And so typically what you want to do is you want to introduce yourself in the email, tell them who you are, where you're from, and maybe something relevant to their research. And then you want to lead by saying, like, I want to ask you a couple of questions. But you want to make sure, state that you are looking to get into their program as well, whether that's in the introduction or like another question. So here, I believe this is an email that I sent to Cornell because I knew a guy who worked at Fermilab that was also in Cornell. So I'm like, hey, I might as well ask you. And so I read a little bit about his research, read some papers, read some of his presentations. And so I wanted to ask this guy, like, hey, there's this part in your paper that I didn't understand. Could you kind of like elaborate? Or you say this on your website. Well, is there some technique that you're using? Because this shows that you've made some effort to look into what they're doing. Rather, it's just like, hey, you got an open position, you know, that sort of deal. And then like at the very end, I sort of ended with like, hey, I'm looking to apply to grad school, and are there any openings? So one thing you want to that'll be distinguished later on in this presentation is whether you are going to be what's known as a TA or an RA. So TA stands for teaching assistant and RA stands for research assistant. So TA is where you teach a class and the university pays you the stipend to teach that class. So that's your living situation. And whereas RA is the advisor, they get grant money to pay you to do research rather than teach. And so you want to typically ask if they have research grants to pay for graduate students, because it's more beneficial to you that you start doing research as soon as possible once you get into the program. And getting support from your potential PI or figuring out if they have support is a huge first step, and it can be a huge deciding factor whether or not you choose to go to that program. Next slide.
Okay, I'll take back up. So the admissions process, actually Ricardo might be better to talk about this if he wants to.
I can, although I'm looking at this slides for the first time in the last year. So I can tell you a little bit about, I don't think the process in our department is unusual. So I'll tell you about that process. So in our department, we have a committee that reviews applications to our 3 PhD programs. And there's actually a separate committee that reviews applications for a master's program. And I kind of chair the committee, and the way it works in our department is the committee evaluates applications, and if they see a student that I'll tell you more about how they come to a decision, but let's say they conclude that there's a student that we should accept, they send the recommendation to me. I kind of look it over, I evaluate some possible criteria, like maybe we've already admitted too many people and we can't admit any more this year, or whatever, or I think there's an issue with the application, I want them to provide some extra information. If I'm satisfied, I then trigger the process of acceptance, and then that goes through some steps. It's in our university, and again, it's not unusual. It goes through several layers of approval. So we make a recommendation, we admit the student, but then our college has to sign off on it. And eventually the graduate school in our university, the graduate school has to sign off on the final offer. And that's when the student receives an offer email, and then they have the chance to accept. So the process of review is, you know, our committee is, the way it works is it's broken into subcommittees that evaluate students for different sub-programs in our graduate programs. And so I think this would be typical. So in one subgroup, there might be 2 or 3 people. So let's say there are 3 people. If there are many if the number of applications is very large, they might sort the applications, you know, sort of break the applications into groups and have one person go through each application, go through a subset of the applications, or maybe make sure that 2 people look at every single application. And they'll come up with some short list, and then they'll you know, try and narrow the list to a number that they then are comfortable they should start. They do some kind of remote interview. So this was happening before COVID. We would just, I insisted at some point that every student we make an offer to has to get an interview, whether they're applying in the US or applying from outside the US. And so they would then schedule, these days, you know, Skype or Zoom interviews with these prospective students. They'll have some discussion with them. Let me break it. So the simple case would be, say, an international student applying from outside the US. We don't bring international students that are applying from outside the US for, you know, complicated immigration reasons, and cost, we don't bring them for a physical interview. Those would then, the decision would be made based on these interviews, these Skype interviews and the rest of the application package. As is said here in the slide, the application package is looked at holistically. It's a good word, you know, in the sense that you're trying to, a good graduate student doesn't have just one characteristic. It's not just someone who does well in the GRE or has a good GPA. It's sort of a combination of features. So some students will show up with different strengths. Some might have a lot of research experience, and that's attractive. Some might be have a very good record academically. They went to a good institution, have very good grades in courses that are attractive. They wrote a good statement. Some may have very strong letters of recommendation. You know, all of these things are looked at together, and then some also make a good impression when they have this interview, and that's how the decision gets made. If I'm going to, you know, we've already heard a little bit about what you should put in letters and how you approach the application itself. Just a quick word on this sort of preliminary interview. The first interview by Skype would be that be prepared. One thing you should be prepared to do is, if you have research experience, is talk about your research experience, and separately about your interests. And they don't need to overlap completely, right? It's perfectly fine to have worked in a developmental biology lab and be interested in biochemistry, you know, single molecule biochemistry. It's all fine, right? But what they want you to, I'll mention sort of just as an example. There's a colleague of mine who is in the committee that does these evaluations. I often hear him say, that student talks like a scientist, right? So this is sort of this is an example of the kind of what we are looking for when we do these kinds of interviews. We want you to it's not, you know, we understand that if you volunteered in a lab for a year as an undergraduate, you probably don't have a first author Nature paper. That's not what the expectation is. And it's very likely, you know, it's almost invariably you haven't contributed intellectually a lot to the research that you're going to describe. But we want you to be able to explain what you did and have some understanding of what you did, what you did fits into the general picture of the research that's going on in the lab. So you should be able to talk coherently about, you know, the lab I've done this work in, their interest is this, they're kind of doing this thing, and I did these experiments, I learned these techniques, I worked with a graduate student or a postdoc, you know, I'm a co-author in a manuscript that's in preparation, something. Talk coherently about what you've done, and that will make a very good impression. That's one of the you know, like Larissa said, we don't want to know about what motivated you at age 6 to become a scientist, right? The research experience is one thing that is really important. And then when you talk about your research interests, there's kind of a fine line here. So I'll just make a quick detour here to make one point. We all understand that you might have a set of interests when you apply, but we're not going to hold you to that. If you say you want to work on cancer, we don't remove you from the program if you decide to work on plant physiology, right? That's not how it works. But what we want to know is, and we understand that interests can be broad, interests can change somewhat. You might think you're interested in cancer, but then you rotated in a developmental biology lab and you fell in love with frogs or something, and you really like that research, and it has nothing to do with cancer, and you want to work on that. That's all fine. What we want is for you to give some sense of where your interests lie and kind of tell a story about how you came to those interests. And you know, and there it's fine to say, you know, I was in this lab, but I heard this talk from this lab, and I took this class. It really sparked my interest. I read some papers. You know, explain where your interests come from. One quick point: don't make the mistake, which I've seen in many applications over the years, of somehow trying to pretend like you're interested in everything, right? I've seen people write down, basically list every single research interest that exists in our department. And that just doesn't make sense. You can't simultaneously be interested in community ecology, you know, and single molecule, you know, the functioning of the ribosome, right? It's maybe, well, I'm not going to say it's impossible, but it's very unlikely. And so be realistic. Say, if your interest is cancer, give some, you know, give some explanation for why you're interested in that area, and try to explain how your interests perhaps match with what you can see is present in the department. That's also something that can make a good impression, is if you say, I'm interested in development, and I see that there are these 3 labs that do development, you know, Dr. Saita's lab and Dr. Lekvin's lab, and they seem to be doing really cool stuff. I'd like to know more about that. I would like to you know, that's kind of the area I see myself working in. That's something that makes a good impression. Final point. So in our program, and that's common in several programs out there, if the students, the very good students who are applying domestically can then be brought in for a physical interview. So last year, we had our interviews scheduled just around the time lockdowns were beginning, or it was obvious that it was a bad idea to bring people over. We'd even started the process. Plane tickets had been bought for some of the students, and then we had to call off the interviews. And it's likely that spring to 2021 will be a bad time to be doing in-person interviews, but that would be normal to do some in-person interviews for students who are particularly interested in, because we understand that if you're applying to several programs, we can't expect you to accept an offer from us if you haven't had a chance to like meet us more, you know, see Houston and see people in our department and have an opportunity to interact with us. So for 2021, I'd expect perhaps a more organized event that is still run remotely, but which would be maybe, so the first interview that I described tends to be done by a member of the committee, and they're just kind of trying to get a sense for how you are as a candidate. Once we're interested, and if we want to recruit you, it would be normal to then schedule some kind of event, which then gives you an opportunity to meet people in our department. So you might end up having like 4 or 5 meetings remotely with individual faculty. And the interesting thing there is we are interviewing you, kind of, but actually you're interviewing us too, because it's at that stage, we probably want to make you an offer, and we would probably only not make an offer if there's some problem. Like sometimes there's an issue that your interests don't really align with anyone that is taking students right now in the department. And so sometimes there aren't offers, but usually when we invite people for these events, we're interested in making offers. And so you should go in with, not with this sense of, oh no, I'm going to go through another round of interviews, but go, okay, they already like me. I'm here to figure out if I like them, right? What you know, is this a place are these people I would like to interact with in the future? So, and then if you have questions, we can discuss them later. I think that covers roughly.
All right, cool beans. So another way to make yourself look really good to these programs that you're applying to is by getting external funding. So there's a bunch of different fellowships that you can apply to that will support you for at least a couple of years, so that when you do apply for the programs, you can put like, oh, I am like an NSF GRFP recipient. So that would be really desirable for them, because then that means that you're supporting yourself, you're funding yourself, because you got this fellowship. So really cool thing to look into before you get into graduate school. So now we're going to talk a little bit about our application experiences. So for me, I applied last cycle, and through SACNAS, it's really cool because at the national conference, you're able to go around and talk to representatives from institutions that can also give you like fee waivers and stuff. So I got a lot of fee waivers and I ended up applying to 9 different schools. And one thing that I always tell people now is like, expect to be rejected from most of the schools that you apply to. So don't you dare only apply to 3 because it's very unlikely that you're gonna get into any of them. So like I said, I applied to 9. I interviewed at 3, or I interviewed at 2, and I got accepted to 2. At UH, I didn't interview, but I got accepted, and here I am. So it was really, I think, heartbreaking for me because I did go to an interview at one of the institutions, and a couple days after I came back from that interview, I got my rejection letter. So also don't assume that because they call you in for an interview that like you're gonna get in, because that's not the case either, apparently. But yeah, definitely make sure you apply to a lot of schools, a diverse set of schools, because I think another mistake that I made was I applied to a lot of Ivy Leagues. So make sure that you like apply to like a diverse like set of schools. I think that's all I have. You already heard my GRE story, so anyone else want to go?
Yeah, I can add a little bit of experience into this. So whenever I was applying to schools, I was applying all throughout fall and winter, and I applied to about 7 schools like Larissa did. Come the spring, I actually got rejected by every single one except for UH. And UH was literally the last school to contact me. So I guess like the one thing I'll say is like, don't give up hope, because I like was starting in January, I got rejected from like 3 schools, and in February I got rejected from 2 schools, and I actually applied to 2 like in-state schools as well and got rejected from both of them. So come in like February or March, I can't specifically remember, I think it was February, late February, I ended up getting the acceptance from UH. So I guess just like always hold out till the end, because that ended up happening to me for sure.
I'll just make a, and we're lucky to have you. We're lucky that that Jacob came to UH. I'll just make a quick point about deadlines. So since a lot of schools have different deadlines, it's, you know, you might be tempted to, if you see this school has January 1st, you might think, okay, I'll apply December 31st and be done in time for that deadline. Be careful about leaving things to the last minute, so especially for the ones with later deadlines. So if you see the very earliest deadlines are like November 1st or something like that, those, it's okay to meet those kind of on the day, more or less, because that's quite early in the cycle. But especially as you get later in the cycle, my advice is, if you have an application ready on November 1st or November 15th, apply to the stuff that's January or February. And the reason is, in a lot of schools, you start looking at the applications that come in, right? I might be bored one day and I'll open up the website and see, oh, so let's see who's applied. And I look down the list, and at that point there aren't that many applications early on. And I might notice, oh, here's an interesting looking application, and I'll start sharing it with some colleagues. Maybe I see that it's not complete, and I'll write, oh, you know, don't forget to tell your letter writers to write in. The thing is, if your application is in first, you're more likely to be seen in time to be invited for those interviews, when there are interviews. And it's always good to be in early, because if the application is ready, right? So if obviously if it's not ready, you can't apply. But once it's ready, even if you know that the letter writers will take a little longer, just apply, get the process running. If you apply early, the letter writers get the email notifications early, which then triggers them to submit their materials. It's just a good idea to be early, especially for the schools that have later deadlines, because if it's early, you're more likely to be seen in an early pass. So.
I can talk about my experience. So I'm a geochemist and I need a very special machine to do what it is I need to do. I use a mass spectrometer, so measuring isotopes. And I noticed that we would have I used to go to UT Austin, and I noticed we'd have visitors that didn't have those facilities at their universities, and they'd be super rushed. They had to do like what I do in 3 weeks. They only had a week to do because that's all their grant had for them to stay at our school. And I said, well, I want to go to a school that has the lab capable of what I want to do. And I sort of searched this list and I saw University of Houston. I grew up in Houston. I live about 3 exits away. And I said, how convenient. And I looked up the director, and I was in the library at UT, and someone was like, oh, I just came from U of H from we're in the geology library, so the same department. And he was like, who are you thinking of working for? And I told him, and he was like, oh, he's nice. And that's a point I want to make. Like, you want to make sure that, you know, you're going to spend what 2 to 6 years with this person that you're going to work with. You need to make sure that, you know, that you get along, or that, you know, they do good by their students. So don't be afraid to email people in that department before you go and say, hey, I'm interested in working for Dr. So-and-so. What has your experience been like? And you'll get, you know, different ranges of answers, because sometimes you go to the interview and they don't act like how they, like once you're in, they don't act like how they did in the interview. So that's a point I wanted to make. But I asked 2 years before I applied. I was very anxious, I guess. You know, I'm first gen and I didn't really know. And I was like, oh, like, you know, I just introduced myself, and he was like, do you want to come look at the lab? And I was like, like it felt very welcoming. And, you know, it was like, well, it's too soon to tell, you know, check back later. And I checked back later. And I've been here for 4 years now. So it went very well. But yeah, make sure that this person, you and them click. You know, if I know some people might not have that option, but it's just, I don't know, it's very important for your mental health too. So that was my story.
Yeah, another point I want to make on that is like it's also helpful to email the students of the professor that you want to work for and ask them what they think or what their experience has been, because it can be very telling what their graduate students, postdocs, or undergrads have to say.
I can share some stuff too. So for me, I mean, when I was in undergrad, I knew I wanted to go to grad school, but one thing that you get with computer science degree is that you can't just go out of bachelor's to get a job. In some majors, perhaps your goal job requires you to get a master's or something like that. So for me, when I was about to graduate, my 2 choices were I either go to work, make some money, then I go to grad school and pay for my classes, or I go straight to a PhD and get some TA-ship, and then that's how I pay for my classes and make a living. And so I applied to 3 schools at first. I applied to UT, I applied to Rice and U of H. And then I said, let me do one long shot. And I applied to Carnegie Mellon, which is like the top CS school and one of the top ones in the world. And U of H gave me an offer that I couldn't reject. It was the only one. UT, they rejected me. Rice also rejected. And then U of H, I had an internship there with one of the professors. So I kind of knew that I was very well guaranteed to be accepted there. And I did. And so I got a TA-ship there for the first year. And to me, that was my main consideration, is that I want to know that I have some financial stability, whether I go to grad school or not. And I found that there. When I applied to Rice, one of the questions in the CS application said, if you get accepted, but you're not offered financial support, will you come to Rice? And I say, no, you got to give me financial support. So I'm not sure if that played a part in the rejection of it, but that was my experience. I didn't want to travel too far also from where I live. So that's why I mainly did UT and I did U of H and Rice. Mainly those two are right here. And then, well, Carnegie Mellon, I just also wanted to see where I stand in terms of for a school like them. Unfortunately, though, I never got a response from Carnegie Mellon. I don't know if I got accepted or rejected, and I hope that one day I will find out. However, I was pretty happy with the offer I got at U of H, so I stuck around, and I'm actually very happy right here. So.
I can speak as well. So I applied to 8 places. I got interviews at 3 and accepted into 2. The one that I was interviewing at Baylor College of Medicine, and it went really well. I thought it went really well, and then they're very competitive, and then you find out later that you don't get accepted, and it's like, oh, okay. So I was left with the other 2 options, and I had U of H, and it was UNT in Fort Worth, and both of them were like really good. I just liked U of H better because I'm born and raised Houston, so it's nice, as well as just the department I've heard really good things about. And after interviewing, I felt better going to U of H. So like the interview told me, so as Dr. Acevedo was telling us, they're interviewing you, but you're also interviewing them. So that's really important to keep in mind.
Alejandro?
Yeah, so I essentially applied to 6 schools. And out of those 6 schools, I got accepted into 3 of them. I got accepted into UH, Rice, and Notre Dame. And the Rice one was interesting because I had presented, I had presented at Rice at some colloquium. And so the people already knew me. In fact, once I got accepted, I got an email from a professor saying, hey, congratulations on your acceptance. You may or may not remember, but I was one of the professors that attended one of your talks that you gave at Rice. Just wanted to say, if you have any questions about anything, just feel free to ask me. And they invited me to come on campus and just sort of like learn more about Rice and their program, and actually talk to some of the professors that I listed that I was interested in. They asked me, okay, list the professors that you're interested in. And I listed like 3, and they scheduled interviews with me and the professor. So that was like a really, really cool experience. And so one thing I was able to do is I was able to leverage a better offer here at the University of Houston. So one of the PIs here wanted to keep me around, but I told him like I need like an incentive. Like Rice is giving me a pretty good offer. And so he said, well, I'll match the offer and I'll give you a job for the summer. It's like, okay, well, now we're talking. So the process has a lot of leeway. If you can leverage a better deal elsewhere, more power to you. But just know that that is something you can do. Like you can negotiate with the institution. It's not common, but it's something you can do. I mean, at worst, if you ask like the institution that accepted you, if you're like, hey, I want to come to this institution, but this other one's offering me more money, or like they're offering this other incentive, is there anything you can do? And at worst, they say no. So there's one thing to keep in mind.
Alrighty. So let's see. So quick summary, choosing the right program is essential. You have to consider stipend, geography, cost of living, and program quality. Your applications will consist of typically statement of purpose, CV, GRE scores, and recommendation letters. In your statement of purpose, you should outline your research goals and reasons for applying to that specific program. Your CV chronicles your professional history. It can be a little bit longer than a typical resume, that's fine. Letters of recommendation are totally crucial, especially since more programs are taking this more holistic approach to reviewing applications. They're definitely going to be looking at your letters of recommendation harder than everything else. GRE may be required. You should prepare accordingly and take it early just in case you have to retake it. And external funding for graduate research is definitely available. So I know a bunch of you guys have been asking questions in the chat, and it looks like we've been doing a pretty good job answering them. If any of you guys have questions that you want to like unmute yourself to ask, now would be the time. If not, we'll move on. All right, Alejandro, this is you.
Hold on. Okay. I think I can make it through. Okay. Okay. So you've applied and now you're a graduate student. Congratulations in this hypothetical situation. So what to expect as a first year. So the first thing you're going to know is that your courses are going to be different than your undergraduate courses. So some programs will treat the courses that you take during your graduate school as more of a review than like actual courses. Some courses, some courses will feel like harder versions of the undergrad courses that you've taken because they go more in depth. You'll find that each program has different standards for what they require in terms of course load. I'll tell you right now, one of the schools I applied to was Princeton, and their department only required at the very least 2 courses that I had to take. And then to qualify for PhD, you had to take a qualifying exam. And so there's a lot of stress that can be induced from the first semester. That is expected. You are transitioning to something that is very big and a huge commitment. So one thing you will also find out is that you'll have to teach. So if you didn't get an RA or you didn't find a lab with a professor that can pay for you to do research, what will typically end up happening is that you will have to teach an undergraduate section of, say, like a base for, say, like an intro to bio class. You may teach a lab, you may teach a recitation, or you may be a grader for a class. So that all depends on the program and the department, of course. So I know for me, I was a TA for my first year, like first and second semester, and then now I'm an RA. So I no longer have to teach, and I just get paid to do research. And so there's a balance that you got to strike between teaching and doing your classes and making sure you adjust to the program. If you move to a new city, there's that you got to adjust to. So for me, I stayed in the city I grew up in, but I started living on my own now. So that was something new for me. Just finding an apartment, getting a car, paying bills, that sort of thing, that just adds on to the list of responsibilities. And so it's really important that you really manage your time and stay organized during like the first semester. Next slide. Okay, so I was talking about classes. So I can tell you right now, like I was mentioning earlier with Princeton, they have a qualifying exam. My program, they don't have a qualifying exam at all. Well, technically the qualifying exam are the finals. So you take classes rather than some big exam that everyone takes. So the course load for me is like about 30 credit hours or 10 classes. So I gotta take about 2 years of that. And then once I pass all my classes, I'm done. Typically, most programs require you to make a B- minimum. In my program, B- is still like a pass, but you have to retake the course. So the real passing for me is like B and higher. So the grades are a little more stringent, and it depends on whichever university you're going to. You're going to find yourself revisiting textbooks and documents you had from your undergrad. You make sure you know the material really well. And sometimes, like I said, with Princeton, they'll make you take like a couple classes and then an exam. And sometimes that exam will cover like basic stuff that you should know in order to like stay in the program. And sometimes the program themselves, even if you fail the first time, they won't kick you out. I'm pretty sure most of them won't do that because they've already invested this much money in you, and it would be just a waste to just kick you out of the program after you fail. So typically what happens is, like, if you fail like a qualifying exam or a class, you'll have the option, you'll have the chance to retake it and redo it and sort of like pass the class. So definitely look into that. So the course load and whether there's a qualifying exam or something that you need to do to meet like a PhD candidacy. One thing I will recommend is forming study groups. If you haven't already done so in your undergrad, that is highly recommended that you do. Next slide. Okay, so like I mentioned earlier briefly, you may have to do teaching. So I mentioned those points. You may have to teach a lab, you may have to be a grader, or you teach a recitation course. And typically, they're mostly going to be like introductory classes. Very rarely is it going to be like an advanced level undergrad course. That usually is decided whether or not you are proficient in that class or subject area. So like I said, that is highly dependent on the program. And so what you'll find is that each assignment, each TA assignment will require a certain amount of weeks that you put number of hours that you put in a week. So for me, I was told that I cannot put more than 15 hours a week, because then that'd be overtime and then they would have to pay. It's all sorts of complicated mess. But typically they do a pretty good job making sure that you give you enough hours to be a TA. However, I have heard where some schools, I won't name names, where they essentially don't treat their TAs right, in terms of like they overwork them, they don't pay them as much to do, they don't pay them with respect to the work that they put in. So that's something that I would like contact like graduate students about, like, hey, if you were a TA in your program, how would that be like? Is it pretty manageable, or is it pretty unrealistic? So that's something you also need to consider. Next slide. And another thing you're going to be doing is you're going to be finding an advisor if you haven't already done so. So if you entered a program and you already have an advisor locked down, awesome. That's pretty good. However, sometimes that's not always the case. Sometimes you just get into the program and maybe that PI is like, oh, I don't have the funding, or I don't have the space after all. So like, okay, well, now I got to find another PI. So sometimes what the program will do is they'll have lab rotations where you'll take like a couple of weeks, maybe months, to like maybe go into the lab, do like a small research project, read some papers, and then you can find out, okay, this PI, that they have some pretty cool stuff. I like to stay here. Or maybe like, maybe this isn't right for me. Maybe I should go on to the next lab rotation. And so this is sort of like a sampling of like the research topics that could be in a potential program. And so very important that you do this. You make sure that you ask if they have the money to support you, because what's a typical experience for a graduate student is that you're a TA for maybe like the first or second year, and then like the third year you're like an RA, and up until your thesis defense. What you typically want to do is make sure that you're not TAing all the way to the end. It's doable, but it's not recommended, because at one point you're going to have to start doing research, and juggling those two can be very difficult. And so one thing that is bulleted here is watch out for bad advisors. I can tell right now, I applied to Temple University. Well, I'll take that back. I almost applied to Temple University. And the reason I say that is because I had a phone call with a potential PI. And once I had that phone call and I realized how rude he was, and essentially sort of giving me the vibe that I should not come here, I'm like, you know what? Maybe I'll take that advice. I won't go there, because it seems like you won't really treat me that well. Just by talking to that person, you can avoid a lot of stuff, a lot of future hassles. And also talk to current grad students. If you get the grad students alone, I'm pretty sure they'll be very truthful of how an advisor is. So if you want to know the truth about a PI, talk to the grad students. Next slide. So you are going to have to become experts in time management from classes, TAing, lab rotations, other obligations that you may have. So you need to prioritize what to do. So one thing is that you make sure that coursework and TAing are your top priorities. TAing because you're getting paid to do so. It is essentially your job. So that should be a priority. And coursework because there is no point in trying to do research if you don't pass your coursework. So it's best to essentially nail this stuff down for the first semester. For the second semester, I would recommend start looking for an advisor. You know, start like going into their office, asking them, like introducing yourselves, asking questions about the research, just so you can get started. Next slide. Another obstacle is yourself. So there's this thing, it's called imposter syndrome. And it's this persistent ability, it's this persistent thought in your head that you are somehow inadequate at a certain area, that your success has been undeserved. And so I can tell you right now, I have had feelings of this constantly, not in grad school, but like as a scientist. And the thing that has helped me overcome this is that, as one professor put it, it's just neurons firing in your head. It's just like something going on in your head telling you that you don't deserve to be here. And if you got accepted into a program, you most certainly deserve to be there, because admissions officers don't make these decisions lightly, because there is a lot of fierce competition when it comes to grad school because it's funded. So there's an article that goes into detail, and there's a lot of talks that talk about imposter syndrome. So if you feel like this could happen to anyone, and not just graduate students, but it can happen to undergrads, professors, postdocs. It happens to anyone. So just know that this feeling is not it's not mutually exclusive to you. It happens to most of us. So there are ways of overcoming it. Next slide. And so I'd like to talk about our experiences in grad school so far. I can tell you, since now I'm a second year, that as I explained in the beginning, the first semester is rough. Like the transition can be very tough, and I've tripped over some obstacles, but the thing is like you gotta push through, because the first semester, as I've been told, it's gonna be shitty. That's the thing. I'm putting it bluntly. But once you get the hang of it, it starts becoming more manageable. And so and like, as I said, like I was living on my own for the first time, living on my own with a roommate, and then and I didn't have a car. So I had to like work out a transportation situation. And eventually I saved up enough money for a car, you know, and then moved places, you know. So being an adult and being in grad school is something of a task. And it is certainly doable. If I can do it, y'all can do it as well.
I guess I'll go next. So I'm a first year. I'm living the dream right now. I am one of those people who is a first year graduate student teaching an advanced lab. So I'm teaching genetics lab. It's a lot of work. I didn't expect it to be this much work. So I would say about like 75% of my time is just like teaching my students, answering questions, and grading. And honestly, in the CMB program, we don't have like a really heavy course load. So I think we only have like one class like per half semester that we like really have to take, I guess, because the other ones are just seminars and then research hours. So I have been doing research. I was fortunate enough to like have my PI already before I came into the program. So I was already kind of working on stuff in my undergraduate career that I kind of carried over into my graduate career. I'm also doing a rotation where I'm learning like new techniques like computational biology and stuff like that. So that's been really fun. I don't think I've dropped the ball it's been pretty stressful, but I think that's just from trying to juggle like TAing responsibilities with coursework and research. And I don't think I've struck that balance, but hopefully I can figure it out as things roll along.
I could go. So I'm also a first year with Larissa and Jake. Yeah, first semester almost done. So I didn't have a PI, or I didn't have, yeah, I don't have a PI like set in mind. So I'm doing rotation. So I'm doing my first rotation. So far I'm enjoying it, all good, but I also want to see like this other lab. So I just recently like asked to be in this other lab for my next rotation and I got accepted. So now I have 2 rotations set up. What else? Yeah, TAing. I want to be in academia. So like TAing was like my to-do list to see if I want, like for sure want to go through with this. So this is my first time ever teaching a class. I've been like leaders in like clubs and stuff in like the past, but I never like taught people anything. So I'm teaching intro to bio, and I mean it's been pretty fun so far. They're almost done, and yeah, I've enjoyed it. So I've enjoyed both doing research and teaching, but again, time management is not my strongest. So I'm trying to figure out how to deal with life and everything. So yeah, I'm figuring it out.
Jake, you want to go?
Yeah, I was gonna go and jump in. So like Larissa and Rosh, I'm basically a first year as well. Things have been hard for sure, because of like COVID and everything, and also I'm getting used to moving to a new city. Like I've never lived outside of Florida, so that's been a pretty big change. We also do things a little differently in biochemistry, because I'm in the biochemistry program. We do like quarter rotations, so I only have 6 weeks per lab, so everything's kind of like rushed per se. So I just finished my first rotation, I'm going into my second rotation, and everything's completely different. So it's almost like learning basically everything all over again, because it's complete different techniques, complete different procedures. But overall, it's been good. I would say I got lucky where I didn't have to TA, and I'm very thankful for that. I don't think that's going to be a thing next semester, so I have to be prepared for being a TA next semester, but I was funded as an RA for the semester, and that's helped a lot kind of acclimate to the new city, to the program, to all of the changes in life, and I'm very thankful that my current PI that I'm doing my rotation with gave me that opportunity.
All right, my turn. So that been there now for 4 years. Fortunately, I guess for me, by the time that COVID started to spread around, I was done with my coursework. I feel like taking classes in person is a little bit better than doing it online. At least the experience usually is way better. So by the time that I had finished my courses last fall. So right now I don't need to worry about that. One thing that I guess I could share about is for once, the project that I worked on for my research, I've enjoyed it. So I think if you enjoy your research, you are going to enjoy grad school. It really comes down a lot to that. And also, I would say that the synergy that you have with your advisor, for example, my advisor, he's not a computer scientist. He knows nothing about computer science, even though he's in the computer science department. If I have a computer science question, I can go to him, right? And even though he understands and is very knowledgeable of his area and how we collaborate with one another, it has come down to more of a thing that I have to work on my own. There's been times where I have not seen or talked to my advisor for a month, and there's been times where I like see him almost every single day. And so I know that based on talking to other students, sometimes that's not something that some students are okay with. Sometimes some students might want something much more structured, where you can like, okay, this is what we're going to do. These are the steps that we're going to take, and we're going to reach, we're going to have a goal, and then we'll evaluate then. With him and in this lab that I've been into, he has been very fluid. you know, we're doing this, and he'd be like, okay, let's do this. And I'm like, hold on, we need to think, how are we going to do this? Because I'm doing it, you know. He doesn't care about learning how to code or anything like that. So at the end of the day, he just wants to see the results. And I know that if I come to him with an issue based on like how we come to that result, he's not even going to be able to help. So definitely, and I know they already talked about this before, but when you're searching for an advisor, this is something that you could also look into. Is that, are you going to be, do you want to be completely like on your own and you just have someone who you just go and say, look, this is where I'm at, great, next goal? Or do you have someone where you're like, okay, no, we got to keep talking every week, and here's the status of the project. Okay, you know what, such and such group somewhere, they are improving this thing, they're getting ahead of us, we got to go in another direction. And so for me, it's been great. I mostly because I feel like I've enjoyed my project. So yeah.
So I'm actually like a fourth year graduate student, but I've done the PhD for 2 years. So I'm also on the other end. So when I first like started my master's, again, I had to TA, and it was an advanced course. It's basically like thermodynamics of minerals pretty much. And that was very challenging because like nobody teaches you how to teach. Teaching is not something you can just walk into. Education's its own separate, degree for a reason. And everyone had such, brilliant different little minds. So it was very hard to learn, like, how to explain to one student in one way versus another way to another student that would get across. So that was very challenging. Also, I had to take my classes. I had to learn how to perform in our lab. Our lab, you can't get like a speck of dust from the outside inside because it would contaminate our entire lab. So it's very strict, and like one wrong move and you've ruined months of work. So it was a very like, high stakes kind of thing. So I had, and then again, I would suggest do not take 3 classes your first semester. I only took 2, but in hindsight, I should have probably just took 1. And then life got easier. My advisor got an NASA grant, and I became an RA. And a point I want to make is that in grad school, you're older and you might have, a more chance of some kind of life emergency. So one thing that I didn't do well in the beginning was tell my advisor, hey, I'm going through something at home, or I'm going through something with my family. And I actually have another, my lab manager's kind of like my second advisor too. And they were like, why wouldn't you tell us? We spent so much time together, and you should have, came and told us, because it looked kind of bad. It looked like I was just like goofing around or not doing my work, when in reality it was, a bad situation. So I'm very thankful that I'm able to like share that with them. What else? And then I won the NSF grant, and I could have went anywhere, and I said, I want to stay here. I really like my research team. What other sorts of advice? Well, one advice, my first semester, I didn't sleep well. So make sure you sleep early, especially if you're working in a lab with dangerous chemicals like I was. Sleep early. But I love it here, and I'm glad I got the master's. I know some people go straight into PhD, but again, our lab is very high stakes kind of thing, and I'm really glad that I got the master's and got acclimated to it first instead of just jumping into PhD and feeling more rushed. So I think that's it.
All right. So Daniel's taking over from here.
All right. We leave the end to the end. So a couple of things. So I mentioned, for me at least, I'm done with my coursework, right? And I second what Stephanie just said. Don't take 3 courses. I also took 3 courses in my first semester. And my reasoning was, if I managed to do 4 in undergrad, surely I can do 3, right? But for some reason, these graduate courses they feel more heavier. I don't know what's about them. I mean, you meet 3 hours a week, just like you do in undergrad. But something about them is just more intensive. So I also think that try not to overload yourself with a lot of courses in the beginning. But I would say this advice depends a lot upon whether you have an advisor or not. often you would be required to find an advisor within the first year. So if you are very loaded with coursework, you're going to have a hard time finding an advisor, as you don't have time to really talk to people and get involved. If you already know who your advisor is, then perhaps you can load yourself with more coursework to try and finish courses earlier and then start to focus on your research. So kind of my philosophy was, I came into UH already with someone in mind to be my advisor. So I said, you know what? I'm going to try and finish my courses very quickly so I can just focus on my research. However, that was not the case for everyone. Some people are having to explore and find an advisor. And so you towards the end, you probably will have maybe a one elective or two. So you will finish those. And I think that's one of the best things about being near the end. No more coursework. And if you want to learn new things, you can always do that on your own. You can always maybe even email a professor and say, hey, can I sit in your class and learn this thing that you're talking about? And so I think that's great. Now, as far as the second bullet that we have here, pass qualifying exam. Some degrees don't have a qualifying exam. My degree does not require me to have a qualifying exam. So yay, but some people do require to take some qualifying exam. And I know there's some degrees where you could skip the qualifying exam if you do something else to kind of get rid of it. So like you might say, well, if you submit a paper, then we will take away that requirement, right? So you can do your qualifying exam. And then once you pass that, at least for me, what I'm required to do is we propose what we plan to do for our research. You do that very early on. And then, well, first you find your committee members, then you propose what your research is going to be about. And then at the end, you are going to defend what you researched on. You're basically saying, look, this is what I've been investigating over the past few years. And, this is why it's good. Here are the results. And you can have people ask you questions on it and ask you why you did X and Y and Z. And usually you present this in front of your committee, and usually this is open. So other professors and students can come in and just hear your talk. And if they have questions, they also ask you questions. And then the last thing, of course, is you write your thesis, your dissertation, and you submit it. And you have to make sure you format it in the right way. I'm in that step, so I'm not, I haven't done that yet, but that's what I'm looking at to doing next. So yeah, I would say the great thing about being the end is no more coursework, and you're entirely focused on your research. And don't get me wrong, some courses are great, but there's only enough time to do things. And when you have coursework, you can focus on the things that will help you graduate fast. And also, I would say, depending on your major and stuff, try to, when you graduate, you could do this kind of strategically. Sometimes you're like, I want to graduate like right now. And it's like, okay, but do you already have what you're going to do right after that? Or should you consider, stalling a little bit to try and find out what you're going to do next? This is not always the case, but it's something to consider when you are near the end and you say, okay, I'm ready to go work. And it's exciting because I've been in school all my life. So it's like, oh, it's about time that I stop. So yeah.
Or you can do a postdoc in more school.
This is true. This is true. Although I feel like it's a little bit different because my family asked me, you're still in school? And I'm like, well, yeah, but I'm not longer taking classes. It's not the school that you're referring to. I'm actually working in a lab, but yes, I'm still in school. So I feel like postdoc, you could still say, yes, I'm still in school, but it's actually a job now. It's not like, but yeah, you're right. You can, and then you can become a professor. You'll never leave school. So there you go.
Yep. Experiences to share.
So I guess more on that thing that I said, you really have to ask yourself, like, and this is where I'm at right now. So I admit I am a little bit undecided, and maybe this is not the case for other majors. In computer science, there's a lot of stuff in industry. So for me, I have to, and I think I would say this is also for engineering, other engineering majors, is you going to graduate, where are you going to go? Do you want to be a professor, or do you want to be going to a lab somewhere in some company, or just go and, if like for me that I'm a computer scientist, just write software and work somewhere. And so that's something that I feel like you come to those. If you already have an answer to that, then kudos to you. You already know where to go. If you don't, then right now I try to stay active. I'm trying to apply for internships at the same time, make sure that you get some experience over the summer, try to stay active with other things just to sort of get some exposure on where you want to go. I don't know if Stephanie wants to jump in and add something.
So for me, I do basically half of my research work at NASA Johnson Space Center. They have a whole division dedicated to meteorites. I study meteorites. There's not a whole lot of people in the United States that would hire you for that specialty, and one's right there. So I started asking, people around, what can I do to try to get a job here? And all of them are like, do the postdoc here. That might be like pretty much guaranteed you'd be a civil servant afterwards. So that's my goal. Like Daniel's kind of undecided, but I'm like, I need to get this postdoc. I need to try. And again, I might not like it there. I don't know yet, but I know that it's challenging and very competitive to even get the postdoc. So I have to be on my A game all the time. And my fellowship kind of makes it easier, but I will have to teach again eventually. But also too, like a lot of like, at first I kind of wanted to be a professor, and my advisor was like, get prepared to move. And I was like, well, like family situation, I can't just move, like, and it kind of gets offensive that people are like, well, why can't you just take your family member with you? And I'm like, she's not a suitcase, I can't just take her with me, so I'm trying to stay local in Houston. So, if it means being a professor at a smaller institution like UHD or UHCL, something like that. But my number one goal is try to get to NASA, not to Mars, but just there, right there at Clear Lake.
All right. Well, I guess that's anyone else want to say something. I guess that's only us two, right? Yeah. So just to summarize a little bit here is that I would say if you have time, so if you're like, I'm still about a year away from graduating and you're not sure whether you want to go into grad school, one thing that I found very useful is I did an REU. So it's this research experience for undergraduates. And I got an advice from one of the professors there. And he said, as part of this experience, it's like, you want to find out if you like this side of research or not. And if you like it, then you can go to grad school and you'll be happy. If you don't like it, then that's also great, because you don't have to even consider it. You just go straight to industry. What you don't want is to be, I don't know. So like I did the REU. I was like, you know what, this isn't bad. I like it. Grad school is something I wanted to do. And I figured that with this REU, I didn't really mind doing the work. So I said, this is not bad. So I will pursue it. But if you do an REU and you're like, you know what, I really don't like this, I don't want to do this ever again, that's also great, because you know what you don't like, you know what you can avoid, so you go on another path. So I would say if you have time, do consider REUs. Also consider doing just an industry internship, because that would also give you experience about industry, and you would say, you know what, I really like this. Now I understand that that's not the case for all majors. Some majors, it's not easy to just say, let me go get an industry internship right now and I'll find out if I like it or not. So I think REUs for the most part are widely available in many universities and for various degrees. So you can try that, and they're paid. So it's not like you're just there. You make a little bit of money, you get experience, you make connections. It is where I met I didn't mention this, but I have two advisors actually. The one that's not CS, and I have another one that's CS. And that's where I met the CS one and in the REU. So I would say try and do some internships if you still have time to do that. Apply early. I graduated in the spring, so I had the fall and the summer to do nothing. So I managed to land an internship while I waited. And it was great because it was an industry internship, and you learn a lot of things that are different in industry than you do in like doing research in academia. So I got a little bit of both worlds, and I still decided, you know what, I want to go to grad school. So I ended my internship in the summer, and then I went to grad school. So, but make sure that you apply early. There are resources available. I mean, you're using one right now, so make sure you take advantage of those to get more information and so on. Make sure you apply before the deadline. Don't do it after the deadline. That's very important. And do not be shy to email professors. Really just email them. And if they don't answer you, it doesn't mean that they're bad, but it's a sign. So you might say, well, they didn't answer. There might be a reason why. It could be that they really didn't see your email. It's happened. But at the same time, it's like, well, they didn't answer, or I didn't get the answer I wanted. Perhaps that's an indication to not have my hopes like, yeah, this is it. So keep sending emails, because emails are free. So don't worry about it. So in graduate school, yes, it is difficult. It's time consuming in terms of the stuff that you have to do. But you know, if you like what you're doing, you're going to enjoy it. And look, all of us went through things, and you know, we did it, and we're still doing it, right? We're still there, and we haven't gave up. So here we are. So it takes a lot of time, motivation, and that's this 4 bullets: perseverance, motivation, discipline, and of course, it's always more fun when you do it with more people. So don't just isolate yourself. Go out there and meet people, especially in grad school. It's easier to not like socialize in grad school. I feel like that's the case. I felt like in undergrad, I managed to talk to more people and connect with more people than I did in grad school, because everyone's busy. Everyone's trying to, you know, pass the class and find an advisor and do all these things. And depending on the institution that you go to, well, maybe sometimes you don't have a lot of chances to socialize, but definitely do try to socialize and go to networking events and stuff like that. But yeah, if you have any questions, if we go to the next slides, you know, feel free to ask as many questions as you want.
Yep, so we're gonna stick around for a few more minutes. If you want, you can ask us questions. Roshni just sent the link to the form. If you want to fill that in, we will send you the slides, because we have a ton of information about all of these fellowships that you can apply to. So if you want the slides, then fill in the form so we can email them to you, and we can send you the link to the YouTube video that will be up about this, and then also the Discord invite link if you want to join us on Discord. And if you have any questions, we will stick around for a couple more minutes.
And also,
thank you guys so much for coming.
So sorry. Also, if you have a question in the future, you know, like maybe you think of something an hour from now, just shoot an email to the SACNAS email, or go to the Discord, you know, and just be like, hey, such and such, and that's it. Like, you know, very simple. Don't be afraid.
I'll put the email on here. I think that's it. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. But yeah, thank you guys for coming. We appreciate it.
Hold on, it's SACNAS.graduate at Gmail.
Thank you. All right, I'm gonna stick around until 6:35. You guys are welcome to leave if you want.
Well, good job to those who presented, by the way. Great job.
Thanks.
All right, I gotta go. Talk to you later.
Okay, bye Alejandro.
Bye.
I have to go get dinner for my family, so.
Okay, bye Roshni. Thank you so much for
I'll stick around
helping
till
with the chat.
6:35, by the way, just in case we have any issues that need to be muted or anything.
Well, I got it now.
I have a question.
Bye. What's up?
Hey guys. My question is, does your school make you do it, like participate in any conferences? Like, well, maybe not now, but would have made you participate in any conferences?
So usually that's up to your advisor. So
It's
for
the
like
money aspect too.
yeah. So if your advisor has like money to support you like going to these conferences, now not so much because a lot of them are virtual, but it is still like you have like registration fees and stuff that you need to pay sometimes. But that's definitely between you and your advisor, because I know for us, like in the bio department, they don't like make us go present at conferences or anything, but my PI will like message me like, hey, this is coming up, like submit your abstract for it. Like just recently, like the Drosophila 2021 conference is happening early next year, so she was like, the deadline's December 3rd, you need to apply to this. So it's definitely between you and your advisor where you present.
And there are like awards and stuff, and your advisor should have money. And sometimes, I mean, there's always like sneaky pockets of money your department has, because in the end, you're advertising for them in a way when you go to these conferences. You're like, look at the work we're doing, and we get to go to conferences. So always ask.
I'll say a bit more about that. So for example, our department has an award, a travel award, that you can apply for every year. It doesn't cover the entire cost of going to a conference, but it covers some. Then there are university level, there's a university level travel fund that you can also apply for. And then often many conferences, because a lot of conferences are run by academic societies, professional societies, that they usually have support for graduate students. So often it requires a little bit of work. So none of these individual sources typically covers everything, but sometimes the conference, if you apply early enough and apply for financial aid for that, maybe the conference waives the registration fee. And then from the department, you can get half the travel, and from your PI, you can get the rest of the travel, and doing that. So there are usually, it's important to look for sources of funding and it's really in your interest. And actually, as Stephanie said, it's very much, I think departments very much should view this as a way to advertise the quality of our programs, because if our students are doing well at conferences, that's good. That reflects well on our institutions. So
definitely, I know last year, like I've gone to conferences that my PI like didn't think would be beneficial to me or anything like that. So one of the big ones is SACNAS. Because it's an interdisciplinary conference, but it's very culturally rich, and that's something that's really important to me. So I wanted to go last year. I didn't get my research accepted to present, but the biology department still sent me so that I could go man the booth when we were kind of promoting UH graduate school. So that was a really good experience too. And I definitely did get money from a bunch of different places. I got money from the Honors College, and I got money from the biology department. I think you're our last one, Andre.
Oh, okay. Like there was quite a bit. Okay. All right. I guess I'll see you later. You probably have something to talk about. Bye-bye.
Bye, Andre.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
All right. That's all.
That went well, I think.
Really good attendance.